Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, April 17th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 559 of the genocide in Gaza. Coming up, Chris Godshall-Bennett, legal director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, will join us to talk about how civil rights defenders are fighting back against the Trump administration's escalating violations of the constitutional rights of citizens and non-citizens alike. Later on in the program, Jon will cover the latest resistance operations in Gaza and the arrival of a second U.S. aircraft carrier strike group off the coast of Yemen. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine. Today, April 17th, is Palestinian Prisoners' Day. According to the Palestinian prisoners' rights group Addameer, 63 Palestinian prisoners and detainees have died in Israeli prisons and detention camps since October 7th, 2023, including at least 40 Palestinians from Gaza and a child, what the legal center Adallah calls, quote, a staggering figure that reflects the scale of violence, medical neglect, and appalling conditions Palestinians face in Israeli prisons. As of April 2025, according to the rights group 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿, the Israel Prison Service is holding nearly 9,800 Palestinians under the classification of security detainees and prisoners, including 3,498 administrative detainees held without charge or trial. Addameer says that after October 7th, 2023, quote, Israeli prisons and detention camps transformed into sites of vengeance, where appalling torture methods and extrajudicial killings became commonplace. In these facilities, inmates endured unimaginable suffering, facing extreme physical and psychological abuse, including brutal beatings and threats of death. Additionally, harsh practices such as prolonged solitary confinement resulted in the deaths of numerous prisoners, all in blatant violation of international laws that outlaw torture and premeditated murder, acts that undeniably constitute war crimes demanding accountability. In this regard, Addameer has documented over 739 cases throughout 2024 across various prisons and the detention centers in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, confirming that every detainee experienced one or more forms of torture or inhumane or degrading treatment. Meanwhile, Israel has attacked all areas of the Gaza Strip, while for nearly 7 consecutive weeks it has closed all the crossings, banning the entry of food, fuel, medicines, construction vehicles, and essential supplies, driving Palestinians into multiple crises of starvation, displacement, and unmitigated trauma. Amand Bazarol, the emergency coordinator for Doctors Without Borders in Gaza, said on Wednesday that, quote, Gaza has been turned into a mass grave of Palestinians and those coming to their assistance. We are witnessing in real time the destruction and forced displacement of the entire population in Gaza. Since Israel resumed its mass-scale attacks on March 18th, approximately 1,700 people have been killed and more than 4,300 have been injured, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, as the last partially functioning hospitals remain out of medications, supplies, fuel, clean water, and are routinely bombed and attacked by Israeli forces. 420,000 Palestinians have also been newly displaced over the last 4 weeks of attacks. Before dawn today, on Thursday, April 17th, Israeli airstrikes across Gaza targeted displaced families living in tents in 3 separate places, in Mawasi Khan Yunis, and in Deir Balah in the central Gaza Strip, and in Jabalia in the north. Journalists and eyewitnesses reported that the tents were engulfed in flames, and the victims, including many children, were burned alive, with bystanders desperately trying to put the fires out. We will not be showing that footage here. A physician in northern Gaza, Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, who has been narrating this genocide on social media while caring for his patients, stated earlier this week that, quote, "After 556 days, Gaza is no longer a place. It is an experiment, a question posed to humanity. How long can a population be bombed, starved, and displaced before it ceases to exist? And how quietly can this be done before the world looks away for good? Over 60,000 are dead, 250,000 wounded, 1 million living in tents. This is not collateral damage, it is arithmetic. The children no longer go to school. The elderly die without medicine. The youth know that they will not grow old. These are not military targets. They are the very fabric of a society being erased." Those are the words of Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, writing from northern Gaza earlier this week. The footage we played was recorded by Yahya Sobieh, a photojournalist, in the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike on a home belonging to the Hassouna family in Gaza City on Wednesday, killing 10 Palestinians and critically injuring at least 13. On Sunday, April 13th, just after 1:30 in the morning, the Israeli army issued forced evacuation orders to patients and medical staff inside the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza City. And then Israel bombed it in an attack that Euromed Human Rights Monitor called the, quote, "targeting of Gaza City's last refuge for the sick and wounded, who should always be protected, and of medical personnel working under catastrophic conditions to save lives." In the dark, hospital staff and patients were forced to leave the hospital on gurneys and on foot. Israeli warplanes then launched 2 missiles at the hospital, completely destroying the laboratory, pharmacy, and emergency department, according to Al-Mizan Center for Human Rights. The hospital's church and other sections also sustained severe damage, the group added. The attack resulted in the death of a 13-year-old child who had lost access to critical medical care during the evacuation. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, the attack completely disabled the hospital and destroyed its CT scanning and radiology services, which were the only such services available in all of Gaza City. The Al-Ahli Hospital is one of Gaza's oldest medical institutions, established in 1882. Affiliated with the Episcopal Church in Jerusalem, it has long served as a vital healthcare provider for Gaza's population, Al-Mizan stated. Our listeners and viewers will remember that it was the first hospital to be bombed by the Israeli army in October 2023, killing hundreds of Palestinians in that first attack 18 months ago. And with no repercussions from the Biden administration and the rest of the so-called international community, of course, Israel has bombed every single hospital and medical facility since. Sunday's attack was the 5th time the Al-Ahli Hospital bombed. Dr. Sam Attar, a Chicago-based physician working at Al-Ahli Hospital, recorded a message for Sky News correspondent Alex Crawford later in the day after the attacks. You can hear the Israeli drones buzzing overhead.
A lot of the hospital staff left. I just wasn't going to leave all those kids with their parents and all those other patients all alone. I couldn't imagine that. Many of them need pain medications for infections, and none of us knew how long it was going to last. And we were also treating patients that were injured in the streets. And we didn't have much, but sometimes all you need is oxygen, an IV, a good nurse, and an extra set of hands. And 3 of the nurses decided to stay, one side decided to stay. We really didn't know what was going on or how long it would last. Lasted 6 hours, but it was a very long 6 hours. We were we felt cut off and isolated. Everyone was worried the army would enter the complex. But right now, we're good and grateful. And we're picking up the pieces, and I think our nervous systems are calming as more hospital staff trickle in.
That was Dr. Sam Attar from Al-Ahli Hospital. On Tuesday, April 15th, Israel bombed the Kuwaiti field hospital in Khan Yunis, killing a medic and wounding 10 people. The Ministry of Health in Gaza said that the attack, quote, confirms the occupation's deliberate intent to inflict greater damage to the healthcare system and threaten the treatment of the wounded and sick, even in their hospital beds. The ministry warned that Israel's crimes against medical facilities, quote, will not cease as long as there is no firm stance from international and humanitarian institutions. Because of Israel's ongoing closures of the crossings, banning all humanitarian aid, the director of field hospitals in Gaza told Al Jazeera that they have lost 99% of cardiac catheterization and heart surgery services in Gaza. The Gaza government media office stated on April 16th that the health situation is, quote, entering a phase of complete humanitarian collapse due to the systematic blockade and starvation policy imposed by the Israeli occupation forces on civilians and residents of the Gaza Strip. Long lines at the remaining food distribution points have become a tragic daily occurrence in all governorates of the Gaza Strip, the media office added. The occupation has targeted more than 37 aid distribution centers and 28 food banks, which have been bombed and rendered inoperable as part of a systematic plan to impose starvation as a tool of war against civilians. Quote, what is happening in the Gaza Strip is not a passing crisis, the office added, but rather an organized crime of starvation that amounts to a war crime perpetrated by the Israeli occupation forces with international complicity and silence. UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, reported this week that medication shortages from Israel's blockade is leading to severe health catastrophes. The agency profiled several children who visit the medical point to have burn wounds treated and to receive essential medication, including an 11-year-old boy named Mohammed, who has burn wounds. However, UNRWA says due to a critical shortage amid a ban on aid supplies imposed by the Israeli authorities, the doctor is often unable to provide him with the full course of treatment that he needs. As his doctor explains, quote, we're supposed to adhere to a strict burn protocol, providing patients with sufficient medication and dressings for proper at-home care. But with supplies so limited, Mohammed must come to the clinic daily for ointment application and wound care. A physician who leads one of the agency's medical clinics in Gaza City said that, quote, standard medical protocols are simply not feasible here, with around 30 patients arriving at the dressing room at a time, many of whom are war wounded or children with severe burns requiring immediate dressing changes. We are forced to rush. Doctors cannot rest for even a moment during their shifts. Moreover, the doctors and caregivers themselves are displaced, having lost their homes, yet they continue to come to work every day, providing medical care to all who need it. We are doing everything we can, but the conditions are dire. We make do with what we have, but the severe shortages of medicine, painkillers, and other essential medical supplies pose a grave threat to the lives of our patients and exacerbate this medical crisis. On April 12th, the Gaza government media office stated that in addition to the banning of all food and medications, more than 2.4 million Palestinians in Gaza are being deprived of clean water, quote, turning water into a tool of genocide and a weapon of slow murder. Israel has systematically targeted water infrastructure, halted supply lines, destroyed water stations and wells, killed water repairmen, and cut off electricity and fuel needed to operate water and sanitation facilities, the media office stated. The office affirmed that Israel's deliberate deprivation of the population of water constitutes a war crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, a crime of genocide, as concluded by the reports of the UN International Commission of Inquiry, and a flagrant violation of the precautionary measures issued by the International Court of Justice, which called for ensuring unhindered access to water and food for the residents of Gaza. Israel murdered a reporter this week in Gaza. Photojournalist Fatima Hassouna was killed along with her entire family in an Israeli strike on their home in the Tufah neighborhood of Gaza City on April 16th. Her colleague Anas al-Sharif wrote this post in her honor. He says, quote, Fatima Hassouna, the Gazan photographer who never left the field since the beginning of the genocide, documented the massacres with her lens under bombardment and fire. She carried the people's pain and screams in her photos and faced death daily without retreating until the day came when the Israeli occupation committed its last massacre against her. She was targeted along with her home, and she and 10 members of her family were martyred. The occupation doesn't just kill the human being, it kills the voice, the image, and the truth. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of A Day in Ward B by Donia Ahmed Abu Sitta, writing from Gaza. Her friend, Fida Zakaria, is a volunteer nurse at the Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis. Donia recently made plans to shadow Fida while she works, quote, to get a closer look at what it is like to be a nurse now during this genocide and to observe what she sees and the people she cares for. Fida works in the maternity unit at Nasser, and Donia spoke to some of the patients who were being cared for there. She also visited the nursery where premature babies were placed under blue lights to treat jaundice. Fida explains that the nursery is beyond capacity at the moment. There is a constant fear among staff that a lack of fuel and supplies will cause disruption to the nursery and the fragile lives cared for within. Donia spoke with Narmin al-Astal, a young mother who was in extreme distress. Donia writes, quote, she was pregnant when Israeli forces attacked her home in northwest Khan Yunis. Narmin was not at home at the time, but her husband and children were. He was buried under the rubble for days and survived. He was dead, but 2 of Narmin's children were killed. Soon afterward, she gave birth via a C-section at Nasser. I found it hard to fathom becoming a mother after your 2 children had been killed. I saw another friend, Haneen, who is a nurse at Nasser. She told me about her patient Malak, who was pregnant when her home in Khan Yunis came under attack by Israeli forces. Malak's husband, 5-year-old daughter, and their fetus were martyred. Malak had her foot amputated and is still being treated at Nasser, yet Haneen said that she expressed the wish that she had been killed with her family so they could all be together. I walked back home after the hospital visit, the sun still high in the sky, thinking about the mothers at Nasser and the children in the nursery under those blue lights. Those are excerpts from A Day in Ward B by Donia Ahmed Abu Sitta, writing from Gaza on electronicintifada.net. And finally, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and resilience across Palestine. Abdurrahman Ismail, a journalist in Gaza, played soccer in the street on Tuesday with his good friend and our beloved contributor, Abu Bakr Abed. Abdurrahman captioned his post, quote, have scored a goal today after an assist from Abu Bakr Abed. We are trying to find solace amid the horror. Here are clips of Abu Bakr and Abdurrahman playing in the street.
يلا 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 Let's go. يلا خلصنا. عيني. اوه.
And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Ali, are you there? Hi, there you are.
I'm right here.
Hi. How are
Thank you for
you?
that. I'm good. Thank you for that comprehensive report. Day after day, week after week, horrific massacres and humanity and resilience and life amid unbelievable horror and death.
Yeah. It is relentless. It's relentless. And we didn't even get to the West Bank this week. But again, it is just this bottomless pit of, the most brutal violence meted out hour after hour by the Israeli occupation. We have a lot to get to today. Ali, why don't you introduce our guest?
Thanks, Nora. You're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abunimah, here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. The Trump administration is rapidly escalating its ferocious crackdown on free speech and the rule of law. New reports of human rights abuses by American authorities emerge seemingly every hour, while the administration becomes ever more flagrant in defying and ignoring orders from courts, including the Supreme Court. On Wednesday, James Boasberg, the chief U.S. district judge in Washington, D.C., said he was launching proceedings to determine whether Trump administration officials should face criminal contempt charges for defying his order not to remove Venezuelan migrants from the country based on the Alien Enemies Act, a rarely used law from 1798. According to the Washington Post, the law was last used during World War II to detain Japanese, Italian, and German nationals, and it laid the foundation for the incarceration of more than 110,000 Japanese Americans. And on Tuesday, U.S. District Judge Paula Sinis in Maryland admonished the administration for defying a Supreme Court order directing U.S. officials to facilitate the return of Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran citizen illegally deported to El Salvador, where he's being detained in a notorious prison. Meanwhile, there has been no let-up in the administration's crackdown on international students and lawful permanent residents under the false pretext of combating anti-Semitism and terrorism. Hundreds of students have had their visas revoked, while several, including Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeisa 𝐓𝐡𝐞 remain incarcerated. And on Wednesday, President Trump asked the Internal Revenue Service to revoke the tax-exempt status of Harvard University after the institution rejected administration demands that would have effectively placed it under government control. The university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights, Harvard President Alan Garber wrote in an open letter. The administration has already suspended billions of dollars in federal grants to Harvard and other universities it is attempting to force into submission. There are increasing signs that the Trump crackdown will not be limited to non-citizens. In comments during a press conference with Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele this week, Trump suggested that he wanted to start sending U.S. citizens to prisons there as well, a move that would be illegal and unconstitutional. We originally announced that we were to be joined today by Abid Ayoub, the National Director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, to talk about the rapidly escalating human rights crisis. But due to a last-minute scheduling conflict, we're very pleased instead to be joined by Chris Godshall-Bennett. He is the Legal Director of ADC. Welcome to the Electronic Intifada live stream, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you, Chris.
Thanks very much. Chris, on Monday, federal agents arrested Mohsen Mahdawi, a lawful permanent resident, as he attended his citizenship interview in Colchester, Vermont, the state where he lives. Mahdawi is a Palestinian born in a refugee camp in the occupied West Bank and had been a student at Columbia University, where he co-founded the Palestinian Student Union along with Mahmoud Khalil. This video of the arrest was posted online by Mahdawi's friend Christopher Hilali, and has been seen by millions of people. Mahdawi has been a lawful permanent resident in the US for 10 years, and according to his lawyers, had advocated for a peaceful resolution between Israelis and Palestinians in different forms, such as public speeches, community engagement, and storytelling initiatives. He had also vocally condemned anti-Semitism. None of that protected him from being arrested. We're going to ask you about Mahmoud Khalil in a moment, but tell us what you know about the arrest of Mohsen Mahdawi, and particularly what it means that he was arrested during a citizenship interview.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally the way to understand these actions is an attack on any dissent whatsoever. It doesn't matter the style, it does not matter the forum. They are using these extreme and shocking situations, right? Someone going for their citizenship interview, right? Completely doing everything that these people say you're supposed to do in this process. And the point really is shock and awe, right? It is meant, I believe, when the so-called anti-Semitism executive order was promulgated, there were public statements by the administration that the point was to set back the Palestinian solidarity movement in the United States 20 to 30 years, right? So the effort here is not just about the individuals, though of course our hearts and our thoughts and our minds and our efforts are with them because they're paying the price. The goal is to scare everyone out of their activism, even to the, like, not just they're going to a protest, right? But talking at an event, posting something online, like the very, very, very basics. So it's an attack on not only, I think, the idea of who gets to be part of the American community. That is certainly one of their goals, but the other goal is certainly to eradicate dissent, and under the guise of supposed anti-Semitism. I believe with him as well, his good Jewish friend wrote recently about how it's shocking to them, and they're, I believe, a Zionist even, and they were just like, the idea of saying he's an anti-Semite is absurd. So it really just shows, I think, that their goal is to really shock and scare everyone away from any sort of activism. And I think it reflects that they've lost, right? I mean, they've lost the ideological fight here. I'm Jewish. I've been involved in Palestine activism for a long time now. And, when I was young, it was a few of us. And now I believe it's well over 50% of young Jews, right? The fight is lost in terms of opinion. And so they're resorting to, I think, these fascist techniques to suppress dissent and to scare the crap out of everybody, frankly, to get them to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And last week, an immigration judge in Louisiana ruled that Mahmoud Khalil, a lawful U.S. permanent resident with a green card, can be deported under Secretary of State Marco Rubio's baseless claim that Khalil's presence and beliefs threaten U.S. foreign policy interests. What does this ruling mean for him and for constitutional rights, especially free speech more generally? Does this mean he's about to be deported? What are rights even in this context?
No, so he's not about to be deported. He remains in what we nicely call civil detention, in immigration detention, which is incarceration. It's a complicated legal process because he has pending habeas relief, which is an effort to get him out of detention while his immigration proceeding is going, which I should note is a totally normal thing to do. Immigration detention is not meant to be used for this purpose, right? It's meant, I think the two sort of legal reasons are flight risk or danger, right? It's meant to be sort of used in those extreme situations because immigration is a quote unquote civil procedure. So what this ruling means is that in Louisiana, in the immigration court, the immigration judge has stated that the removal is lawful. Now that will be in that process appealed to the Board of Immigration Appeals, and then depending on what they say, it can go to the relevant court of appeals in the federal, the normal Article 3 court system. And so there will be.
Chris, just for those who aren't familiar with the legal distinctions here, and
Sure.
correct me if I'm wrong, the immigration judge and the Board of Immigration Appeals are part of the executive branch.
That's right.
And when you talk about an Article 3 judge, you're talking about Article 3 of the Constitution,
Yes.
a member of the independent, constitutionally independent judiciary. So basically, this decision that Mahmoud Khalil can be deported was taken by a Trump administration official, not by an independent federal judge. Is that correct?
That is correct. The way that the system is set up is that all removal related adjudications are filtered into this administrative court system where employees of the Department of Justice are the administrative judges. And then there is an appeals process within that system, the Board of Immigration Appeals. And then the way that the Immigration and Nationality Act has set it up, it goes through that process. It results in either a positive ruling and the person is not removable, but more likely a final order of removal, which can then be appealed to the traditional sort of constitutionally independent courts under Article 3 of the Constitution. So there will be a point within that process when a independent judge. Now, I think, and it's obvious that everyone knows why they wanted him in Louisiana, so they could get into that circuit where they're more likely to get a favorable ruling. Now, concurrently, while that's happening, you have the case in New Jersey, which is in the District Court of New Jersey, and that is a habeas case. So that the goal of that case is to get him out of detention pending the immigration proceeding. So there's different angles this is happening in, and of course this is reflected in other cases as well with other incarcerated folks who had their visas revoked. There's always going to be this sort of parallel process. It really reveals, I think, and we just recently worked on a case with Mamadou Tall, the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 student who ended up voluntarily leaving the country because of just the hell that they're putting everyone through. But that was a situation, right, in which we had to face head on because we had originally filed it as a pre-enforcement challenge, and then ICE showed up at his house. And we got an email at 1 a.m. from the Department of Justice demanding that we, his attorneys, turn him over to ICE custody. So the result of that is that because the removal proceeding had begun, they state, the day before we filed the lawsuit, it's taken out of the district court's hands and it has to be filtered into this process. So it's a tangled web, and it really reveals, I think, to go back to your question about what do rights mean. It's really important that people understand, especially in this context, the difference between the sort of legal theory of your rights, right? On paper, everyone in the United States, whether documented or undocumented, has First Amendment rights. But your rights are only as good as you can enforce them. And the way that the Immigration and Nationality Act has set it up is that your effort to protect those rights, to fight for those rights, is filtered into this system where you're not going to get as I mean, it's a joke. It's like a kangaroo court. Mm-hmm. And you have to wait years potentially to go to the courts that we traditionally sort of rely on. Meanwhile, they want to keep you in detention, far away from your family, and in Mr. Khalil's case, from his pregnant wife, and likely to miss his child's birth. Right? That's the point. Point. The cruelty is the point.
Yeah, and so, but I thought it was important to highlight, because a lot of people heard that the judge ruled that he can be deported, to understand that this is only the beginning of a legal process. We're not even at the legal process yet. So the real urgency here is to get him out of detention. And we have to hope that the federal judge in New Jersey rules for that, and that it can be enforced. But let's turn now, Chris. Last week, ADC issued a statement expressing its grave concern about the increasing pattern of harassment and intimidation directed at attorneys throughout the United States by officials from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the Department of Homeland Security, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, often called ICE. This includes the detention and interrogation of Dearborn, Michigan-based attorney Amir Meklid at Detroit Metro Airport, and a demand to search his devices. Since then, there have been reports that another Arab-American attorney, Bashir Atallah, was detained while returning from Canada by car after a weekend trip. They handcuffed me, they twisted my arm, my wrist, and treated me like a criminal, Atallah said. Atallah said that CBP agents demanded to go through his phone and that he consented, quote, under duress. And then yesterday, that's April 16th, the Center for Constitutional Rights revealed that a journalist who goes by the name Musa was detained after flying into Tampa, Florida from Cuba. In a statement, Musa said, quote, I was told that most of your rights are suspended because this airport is a border crossing, including my right to a lawyer. I was interrogated by a counterterrorism agent and treated like a criminal and a terrorist. Synonyms this empire has long made interchangeable with being Black, Muslim, and politically active. Musa added, quote, for roughly over 3 hours, I was held without access to legal counsel, aggressively questioned, patted down, and subjected to an invasive groin search. Musa refused repeated demands from the agents to power on and unlock their laptop and phone. The devices were confiscated and held by Customs and Border Protection, and Musa, supported by the Center for Constitutional Rights, has filed a lawsuit demanding their return. Chris, what's your reaction to these incidents at the border involving U.S. citizens? And can you reiterate for us what the rights are of U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, and non-immigrants, such as visitors or students at U.S. borders?
Sure. So I think in terms of your first question regarding my reaction and our statement, I think it really comes from the same place, I think, as the efforts to have law firms bend the knee, to have universities bend the knee. It is an effort to cut off, to scare those institutions, those parts of society that are the tools by which people sort of, they use to fight back and to assert their rights. I think that they're surprised perhaps by how much of a fight is being put up by the folks that they are targeting. And so now they're going at the means by which they fight. They're trying to intimidate attorneys. And it's working in some cases. I mean, you've seen these law firms like make these insane deals that are just, I don't know, I don't have words to describe them because they're just so disgusting and insane to me. But now they're going after these individual attorneys as well in attempts to, I think, deter them from taking on this work. And of course, I think it's also a part of the long history of harassment of Arab and Muslim folks at the border under the guise of national security and things like that. But I think we're seeing an intersection of those two motives now. Now, when it comes to, the rights of folks at the border, I mean, again, I think just like in the immigration cases we're seeing, it reveals an underlying thing. I mean, I think maybe there's a misconception, right, that the administration is doing something. They're doing something new for sure and something extreme, but they're using tools that long predate this effort, right, and have been used for a long time for precisely these purposes, but perhaps not at this scale. And so it's as a legal matter, your rights are curtailed at the border, at ports of entry. There are fewer sort of protections there. The Fourth Amendment, which protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures, does not apply with the same force at the border as it does inside the United States. And so for citizens, the one thing that they cannot do is deny you entry into the United States. If you're a citizen of the United States, you must be allowed to enter the United States. They can, however, question you. They can have you declare if you have fruits or vegetables, right, in your bags. They can search your belongings when you come through. I think we're going to see, as this goes forward in litigation, the extent to which they can do things like search your phone. With attorneys, of course, there's complicated factors about attorney-client privilege. If they have work information on their phone, it can get really in the weeds, and I think we'll see how it develops. But they're going to try to stretch it as far as they can. When it comes to non-citizens, lawful permanent residents as well, like your green card cannot be revoked except through an administrative process, right? You have due process rights there. So they as well, I think, are unlikely to be denied entry with a green card. Though again, I think we'll see how far they push. It's clear to me that the administration is not treating green card holders as distinct from visa holders. They are treating them as a single sort of category. Folks on non-immigrant visas, like visitors or temporary work type things, when they re-enter the country, they are at the highest risk. Their rights are the most curtailed. That you don't have to give them, your phone information, but because they have such power over you, I mean, to the point where they can live revoke your visa, right? They can cancel your visa there and then put you into expedited removal proceedings, put you right back on a plane, and that comes with a ban, a 5-year ban on any sort of travel back into the United States. So you won't be able to even get a visa unless you go through these complicated processes to get waivers and things like that. So there's kind of a spectrum. And I think that the most severe, possible result is straight up denial of entry, which I think is a risk for folks on visas. Something in the middle, I think, in terms of risk for green card holders, depending on how far they push this. I don't believe we've seen green card holders denied entry at this just yet. And then citizens, I think they have to allow them entry, but they're going to do things like take your phone, et cetera, and we'll see how this litigation goes. But I think that at the end of the day, it is all of the same sort of effort to intimidate and to scare and to quash dissent.
One thing I want to come back to, though, Chris, I understand that, and just to focus on citizens for a moment, I understand that there are some gray areas at the border, and having had a lot of experience at the border, I've sort of educated myself over the years and tried to be very vigilant about what my rights are. And when you show up at the border, if you're coming into the United States and they want to question you or search you or take you for secondary inspection, they're going to tell you all sorts of things that are intended to make you believe they have more power than they do. So they have the right to search your baggage and your person for customs purposes. Are you bringing in fruits? Are you bringing in vegetables? Are you bringing in, huge quantities of cigarettes or Rolex watches or whatever it is, or undeclared currency over a certain amount? That's a customs search that they have the right to do. But you actually, and I'm going to put this forward, and then you can push back and correct me if I get something wrong. You don't actually have to answer any questions at all. Not even about whether you have fruit or vegetables, because they're free to search your baggage for fruits and vegetables. I mean, if they ask you if you have fruit or vegetables, I'll tell them the truth. I mean, never lie to them. That's certainly, you should never lie to them. Always tell the truth, but only answer the question. When it comes to things like searching a phone, they assert that their right to search you for fruits and vegetables and Rolex watches extends to the content of your phone. My assertion, and I think that this is legally grounded, is that they don't have that right.
Yeah.
They may assert that they have that right, and they're going to tell you, we search people's phones because we're protecting the United States from terrorism or child pornography or all sorts of things. But they cannot force you to give them permission to search your phone, your laptop. They cannot torture you to get your password. And they can seize your devices, but if you have taken the precautions you have a right to take to protect your privacy, well, if they can find a way to break into it for lawfully, then that's up to them, but you don't have to help them. And the reason I stress this is because I've seen in the recent reports even attorneys consenting to searches of their phones, which surprised me. And that gives the impression that they have the right to go through your phone and search your contacts or search your emails or whatever it is. And I stress this because, attorneys have privileged information on their phone, but we all have personal things on our phone. Journalists have perhaps sources, sources they've been communicating with. And I just want to get some clarity about that so we don't do the government's work by convincing people that at the border you have no rights. And I get that for non-citizens, whether they're green card holders or visa holders, they are in a more precarious situation. But this administration is trying to extend that vulnerability to everyone, including citizens. Can I get your comments on what I've just said?
No, I think that's correct. There's no doubt, right, that you do not have to answer these questions. I mean, you have to make the sort of required customs sort of things that you mentioned. You do not have to give access to your phone. I think that what we're seeing is, it goes back to what I said earlier about like you have rights, and then what is the practical, like, I'm not. I think that you have different, the reason that attorneys, I think, are giving different information on this is because it depends really on how you look at it. I think if you're just giving a statement of like, these are your rights, fine, that's true. And you don't have to answer, you don't have to do this, you can sit there and assert yourself. And that might be, I think a lot of it depends on where you're at, who the particular people at that particular port of entry involved. There are some airports that are worse than others for these sorts of things. And there's a sort of individual determination made about whether the strategic thing to do to get out of that situation is to fight back. Some places that makes sense, and then they'll just give up. They'll just be like, well, I can't do anything, and they'll just give up. In other places, they'll take your phone and force you to file a lawsuit, right? So I think that it's true, and everything you're saying is correct, and people should understand that you absolutely have the right to say no. And then I think on an individual level, people have to do their own risk assessments and make determinations about, and we advise people to just have your phones be, if you're traveling internationally, just like have it be such that it doesn't matter whether you give them your phone. Maybe you don't have your WhatsApp groups or whatever on it. And obviously I don't like telling people that, because you shouldn't have to make decisions like that. But I think that there's a balance between sort of the assertion, and then for people who are potentially in vulnerable positions, have somewhere to go, don't have the ability to be detained, don't want to go through that, to sort of make determinations in a practical sense about what sort of things I'm going to decide to do in this particular situation so I can get out of here. And I don't know that it cuts both ways. I think cooperation can lead to abuse, and maybe you'll get your phone taken anyway. And on the other hand, refusing might do that, or it might make them give up. It's really hard to say at the abstract level. So while yes, it's true, you don't have to, I think that everyone has to make their own risk assessments in a moment like this, and determine for themselves how much tolerance they have for a fight. And I don't blame anybody really, or for sort of protecting themselves in the way that they see fit, whether they're going to sort of have that because it really could get contentious. I mean, it's just real talk. These are not nice people that we're dealing with, and it could be a very difficult situation. So I don't blame people for trying to get through it, but I think you have to really think carefully about whether you're in a situation in which you want to have you do that. And I don't really advise in either direction. I think it depends on the specifics. I think it depends on that particular person's risk, about which way you're gonna go. So yes, the rights are clear, and that's true. Whether you want to be the person who's the test case, I think, is an individual determination that people are going to make for themselves, and that's why you're going to see different, I think, reactions from different people in that situation.
And that's definitely true, but I think it's important that people know what their rights are.
Yes,
and there
absolutely.
are certainly situations where they'll ask, I've had this where they'll ask one or two more questions than I think they should, and I'll just be, if I think it's an innocuous enough question, I'll just answer it to get through because I'm not losing anything. But if it comes to like, we're going to search your phone as a journalist, that may be where I choose to assert my rights. So, but the important thing is I just don't want people to go away with the impression that people should make their choices from a position of knowing what their rights are, not going into it believing that they have no rights.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely not the case that statement they made about your rights are suspended at the border as a citizen is a completely false statement. The particulars at the border are different than if you're walking down the street, but it is entirely too much to say that your rights are suspended, and people should make determinations with the knowledge of both what their rights are and the particulars of their situation, and come to their own conclusions, potentially with the advice of an attorney if they're going to travel.
Those are really, really good reminders. Thank you so much, Chris. ADC is a civil rights organization that engages in litigation, but it's also a community organization that seeks to mobilize people to take action. What are some of the ways people can push back against these abuses, against, as you mentioned, the point of all of this is cruelty. It's to instill fear and intimidation. It's to make people not trust one another, and ultimately to shut up about Palestine. So what are the ways that the community can actually organize and fight back?
Yeah. I think this is a moment in which it's a moment of defense for sure, right? In a way that it hasn't been, at least not so profoundly. I think there's a real need to sort of protect each other. And so I think what people should do depends on how they're situated. I think an ADC is a membership-based organization, as you said. And so we have folks who are citizens, non-citizens, green card holders, all manner of folks of different status. And so I think that it's incumbent on citizens right now to assert these rights, right? To not go quietly, to continue to agitate and advocate and to push back. I think that it remains to be seen whether the courts are going to fulfill their duty to protect the First Amendment right now. It really just remains to be seen. We have not seen yet, right, the application of in that the orders right now are focused on immigration consequences, but there's the seeds of criminal enforcement of anti-discrimination laws and material support statutes and other such things against citizens as well for their advocacy. So that legal fight, I suspect, is to come. And we're going to see what the courts are willing to do. But in the meantime, the only way to sort of fight back against the suppression of First Amendment rights is to vigorously exercise those First Amendment rights. And that looks different for different people, right? I think it's totally reasonable for non-citizens in our community to be cautious, right? The consequences are severe. And I think it's okay for people to make decisions that are best for themselves while they're doing it, as long as we also have a robust citizen response doing everything they can. And I mean at the level of like go out in the streets. I mean, this is an all hands on deck. This is the worst case scenario, right? This isn't, some policy disagreement that people can sort of casually protest and you're okay if it doesn't go your way. This is the fundamentals. And so it's get out there, it's tweet, it's every tool in the toolbox needs to be used. Press Congress for whatever that's worth. And I say that with like sort of a, I'm a bit of a skeptic, but I think we can't give up on that tool, even if it doesn't go anywhere. Press these folks who are just, I don't even know what they're doing, giving speeches for 25 hours that don't do anything, to do more. I mean, I think just you have to put them to task. And then also I think form this, especially the immigration battle right now, is not fought alone by those involved in Palestine activism, right? This is a broader effort. So I think we need to find, and I would encourage folks to find solidarity opportunities with other communities that are facing this. The Latino community, for example, right, which stands to experience a lot of harm from these sort of efforts when the sort of effort broadens even more than it already has. So, and then folks who don't have any skin in the game, to take note and understand that this is not going to stop here, right? This is not, you can't just give up. The First Amendment cannot apply in this sort of haphazard way. It can't not apply to some people, and the people who you can't feel comfortable that it's going to apply to you if it doesn't apply to others. So at the end of the day, I think that real talk, it really is it's a hard question to answer. The traditional tools have not worked, right? So we're going to continue to fight in the courts, to push the courts to do what they need to do, to gum up the works, to slow this down, to say what the limits are as they push them. But at the end of the day, the only thing that is really ever going to systematically change anything is people really putting their foot down and demanding that this stop. And that happens in the streets, not in the courts.
A very sobering situation, a very serious situation, and we want to try to inform people, let them know about their rights without scaring people more. And that's a fine balance too. People should remain involved. We're still here. We're not going to be intimidated by this. We're going to exercise our rights, and people should do that, but from a position of knowing what their rights are. And again, solidarity is so important. Communities staying together, speaking out on behalf of those who are targeted. One of our colleagues in a private discussion made a point that I think it was Senator Van Hollen went to El Salvador to try to see this, to see the unjustly, illegally deported person, Mr. Garcia, who is being held there in that disgusting prison. But we don't know of any senator who traveled to Louisiana to try to check on Mahmoud Khalil or on Moiz Salhi. So we need to keep pushing them. We need to be calling them and saying, why aren't you doing more for your constituents and for these members of our community? So we need to remember to do that too.
Absolutely.
Chris, we're so grateful to you. This is really important stuff, and I know we're going to be talking about it for a long time, so we hope you'll come back and help us keep understanding this as it develops. We're grateful to you and your colleagues at ADC for standing up for everyone's rights, and people can learn more at adc.org, right?
That's right.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Come back soon.
It's fantastic.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
And of course, this crackdown is happening here in the United States, but there's also a big crackdown across Europe.
Yeah.
And that's something we hope to also discuss in coming weeks. We're going to try and put together a discussion focused more on the deteriorating human rights situation in Europe.
Yeah. And Canada. Let's not forget our neighbor
Yeah.
to the north.
Well, isn't that the 51st state?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed actually yesterday that the Canadian opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, is now suggesting, copying Trump, and suggesting that Canada would start deporting foreign students who protest on behalf of Palestine. So I don't know if that's going to be a winning strategy in Canada. Maybe we can get on our resident Canada expert.
Yeah, let's bring on a Canadian.
For that, that's a tough one. It's difficult here too. We're not the 51st state, but we are a resource colony for sure.
Junior partner.
And junior partner.
Yeah. Amazing.
That was a lot of good information.
Yeah.
It's good to have that.
Yeah. I mean,
a lot of people are worried. I mean, rightfully so.
And it's changing every day.
It changes every day. And it's
that's
people's
right.
lives.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. It is.
Dark times.
Very dark. Well, last week, Jon, you were talking about how people were saying, "Where is the Palestinian resistance?" And you kind of illustrated that as saying, "Well, the Palestinians are asking, where are the Israeli soldiers?" A little bit of a shift this week.
A little bit of a shift, yes.
The Israeli soldiers have appeared. Yeah.
Well, the buffer zone is tightening so much that they're rubbing up against each other now. So things may be changing in the coming weeks, but the Israelis may just freeze in place because they don't seem like they're interested in a fight right now.
Right.
They're just interested in civilian massacres. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. All right.
We will break that all down.
Yeah, take us through what happened this week. Thanks, Jon.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right, so you are watching the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 559. I'm going to be covering Yemen shortly, but let's begin with Gaza. We'll pull up this map. I've got us a new map for longtime listeners and viewers. This is a really disgusting map from the United Nations that published on that shows you the no-go zones on the maps that I have been describing on our maps for the last number of weeks. Today is the 47th day of a total blockade on the Gaza Strip, not just a ceasefire violation, but reneging on the ceasefire terms that were agreed upon and guaranteed by the United States to have. Tents is the predominant violation from the ceasefire, but humanitarian aid into Gaza has been completely cut off, as Nora described in the news report. There's 1.8 million Palestinians in Gaza who are in need of emergency shelter, and those tents and those trailers have not been allowed in. No food, no medicine, no medical supplies, no fuel. All have been blocked now for 47 straight days. We're reporting this on April the 17th. There's 500,000. You can see on that map, the purple areas are the no-go zones. Those are effectively the buffer zones. You can see in the north, that's the buffer zone north of Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia. That's where there was an Israeli settlement until the year 2005 during the disengagement. Those settlements were uprooted. If you look south of Gaza City on that map, that's the Netzarim corridor. That was also an Israeli settlement. And then you move down to the south. We'll zoom in on the south in this next frame. We're going to start with the north. Sorry. So you can see a north there. There's Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia, and you can see the purple zone is the buffer zone. That's where the settlement used to be. Then the buffer zone around the edges has expanded from 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers, and you can see on the map that the UN has marked 65% of the Gaza Strip as a no-go zone. The Israeli military is not pushed all the way across the Netzarim corridor that you're looking at there. they are just enforcing it with a shoot to kill from the Salahadin road. So the military has not pushed all the way across to the coastal road on Netzarim corridor, but it's a shoot to kill zone. You need United Nations coordination in order to cross through that area. And the Israeli military bragged this week about 1,200 airstrikes since they resumed the war full on March 18th was the beginning of the massacre, where they began with where they killed hundreds of people in 80 airstrikes in less than 10 minutes and a surprise attack all across Gaza. So we're starting in the north. So this is you're looking at the north. Here, they're expanding those buffer zones, like I said, from 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers. If we look at the next map, you can see the evacuation map that the Israeli military, this is how they're doing it. They just do it by grid at a time. This is Shujaiya and Tufan Daraj area, and they're pressing in the buffer zone, and the buffer zone is enforced with shoot to kill. This week, Abu Ubaidah released a message saying on Tuesday, saying that we announced that we have lost contact with the team guarding soldier Edan Alexander. That's the American soldier who the Trump administration is trying to get out first. That's my comment. Back to Abu Ubaidah. We are still trying to reach them. It seems that the occupation army is deliberately trying to kill him and hence relieve themselves from the pressure that is caused by dual citizen prisoners in order to continue the genocide against our people. Now, that could be psychological operation by Qassam in saying that, because this prisoner is the one that the Trump administration seems to care about and seems to be wanting to negotiate on. But with 1,200 airstrikes and upwards of 2,000 people killed, we know from captives who were released that the most dangerous part of being in Gaza as a captive is the Israeli military. And there's 59 captives remaining in Gaza. And as many as 37 of them have been killed by Israeli strikes. So that is a very real possibility that that's in fact true. And one of the captured soldiers did an interview this week, and it was pulled from Israeli state television because she said that Netanyahu needs to negotiate to get the rest of the Israeli prisoners back from Gaza, and she asked to have that be pulled because she was facing a wave of vitriol and hatred targeting her from pro-Netanyahu accounts, calling her a trash girl and suggesting that she be sent back to Gaza. So even in Israeli society, there's a split on whether they want these captives back, if it means ending the genocide, and when they do come back, they're called trash if they ask for the rest of the prisoners to be resumed. So in Shujaiya area here, if we go to the next slide, we can see this is the first sniper operation that we have seen since the resumption of fighting. And you can see in these slides that I'm going to show you today why the military is out of reach largely. You can see them here. They're up on a hill, Tel al-Montar, east of Shujaiya. This is the highest point in the Gaza Strip. And you can see them. There's snipers. There's snipers up on top of the hill, and they're just shooting anything that moves. And that is their positions. They're not going down. They're not on the ground inside built up areas where the resistance is waiting for them in their territorial units, ready to defend the territory. This is an edit I have done so that the soldier doesn't get killed on camera, which he pretty clearly did. It's a 50 cal sniper rifle, and it hits that berm, and we know that that round penetrates dirt. I've shown you it penetrating 3 cinder blocks before, so that soldier's down. Again, this is the first on film confrontation, but this week there was a number reported both by the Israelis and by the Palestinians that there has been clashes on the edges of these buffer zones. in 𝐄𝐥𝐿, there's been multiple operations. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 announced this week that they had clashed with fighters east of 𝐄𝐥𝐿, so they're still not in 𝐄𝐥𝐿. And again, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 got another Merkava tank with a pre-planted IED, and the Israeli military confirmed that operation. If we look at the next slide here, you can see this is the main focus of the resistance right now. You can see the tanks are well set back in the buffer zone, and this is a rocket artillery attack by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Islamic Jihad. This operation was on Sunday. There was also multiple of these types of rocket attacks this week. And just to say that the resistance operations does not relate to the capacity remaining in the resistance. It doesn't indicate that they are in any way broken. We know from Israeli military intelligence that spoke this week, Amman, their IDF military intelligence, that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has more than 40,000 fighters, which is more than they had when the war began. We know that also from U.S. intelligence, who told us back during the ceasefire that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 had recruited 15,000 additional fighters. And so even if you use the highest, most absurd number that the Israeli military said of fighters killed, those numbers show that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is bigger than it was before. And you have veteran fighters who are the fighters who have survived this war are the best fighters, and they can pass on that training very easily. So there is no indication between the capacity of the resistance and the number of resistance operations you're seeing. And you're going to see that in this next little bit. I'm going to show you a few slides from the south of Gaza. This is the UN map in the south, and the area with that black line that essentially runs across, that's marking the Rafah governorate, but it's also basically the line of the Morag corridor that I told you about, that they're cutting between Khan Yunis and Rafah. And Israel has made a big fuss about this in the Israeli media, that they're cutting another corridor, and they make it seem like it's this intense military operation that they're succeeding at. But take a look at these next pictures and you can get a real good sense of what they're talking about. So this is the Israeli military positions. They just pile themselves up on a hill, and snipers just sit there ready to shoot anyone that moves. This is the Morag corridor. If we look at the next slide, you can see what we're talking about. This is the Morag corridor. So when I said in previous weeks that the resistance attacking the buffer zones is equivalent to attacking Israel itself, this is what I'm talking about. That massive open space is patrolled by the air, by drones, attack helicopters, fighter jets, and then you have the military stacked up along those berms in an area where there's miles on either side of just open space. So it's not realistic for the resistance to be carrying out these low success probability operations and fighting in an open field like this. This doesn't make any sense from a military science perspective. If you look at the next slide, you can see it also. This is the Morag corridor as well. Like, look at what you're looking at there. First of all, to claim that territory is not a military achievement, as you can see. There's nothing around it. All you're doing is destroying the agricultural sector in Gaza, which is all this genocide has been doing, is destroying life in Gaza. You're not defeating the resistance in any way. There's been shelling operations. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 reported multiple shelling operations in the south along this Morag corridor, which makes sense. Mortars, firing mortars and firing 107 millimeter rocket artillery, like we saw in that previous image from 𝐓𝐡𝐞. So I just wanted to show people those. Is there one more? I think there's one more that shows the just the openness of this area. So that is the Gaza Strip. We are going to turn now to Yemen. We've got a couple fresh maps on the Yemen front to get people acclimatized to the area we're talking about. So the main Ansar Allah territory is in the red there around Sana'a. And of course, up in the top, you can see Israel, Gaza, Amman, Jordan, and then You can see the Red Sea is that long, skinny sea there that connects to the Suez Canal and into the Mediterranean. And down at the bottom by Yemen there, that's the Bab el-Mandab. That choke point is what has been blocked off by Yemeni forces to Israeli shipping and to ships servicing Israel. Today is the 33rd straight day of U.S. assault on Yemen in order to protect Israel's genocide in Gaza. The Yemeni armed forces continued their long-range attacks against Israel, drones, ballistic missiles. No attacks, still no reported attacks on commercial shipping at all. All the attacks are concentrated on American forces, aircraft carriers, and Israel with long-range attacks. The second U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Carl Vinson, joined the USS Truman. They are stationed in the Gulf of Aden there, actually out in the Arabian Sea. They're off the coast of Oman, technically. They're doing the same thing as the Truman is doing. The Truman is up north of Jeddah, up near Yanbu port in Saudi Arabia, 2/3 of the way up the Red Sea there. They're trying to stay out of range of a number of Yemeni armed forces anti-ship cruise missiles and anti-ship ballistic missiles. So they're not anywhere near the Yemeni coast where they get hit really hard. This week, Central Command, the U.S. Central Command broadcast a message that said the USS Harry Truman Carrier Strike Group continues non-stop 24/7 operations against the Houthis. There's been more than 350 American airstrikes, according to a U.S. official in the Wall Street Journal. But tallies of reports from the media in Yemen indicate that number is actually a lot higher than that. Just in the last 24 hours, Yemeni media reported 70 attacks, and we know that Abdul Malik al-Houthi talked in his speech last week about 90 strikes in a single day at one point. So 350 sounds really low. We know also from previous reporting that this operation is now well over $1 billion operation, according to Pentagon officials. And also this week, the U.S. dropped a psyop into the Wall Street Journal saying that the U.S. is working with Yemeni militias, U.S. mercenaries, and the United Arab Emirates planning a ground offensive against Ansar Allah. This is what the Wall Street Journal said. Private American security contractors provided advice to the Yemeni factions on a potential ground operation. People involved in the planning said. The United Arab Emirates, which supports these factions, raised the plan with American officials in recent weeks, the U.S. and Yemeni officials said. The U.S. is open to supporting a ground operation by local forces. And again, that's from the Wall Street Journal, their intelligence reporter. So obviously, someone was in their ear to post that. And the talks are about the Hodeidah port, which is the key port in on the northern edge there of Yemen, northwest of Sana'a, that you can see there, which is the capital. If we look at the next map, this is a map of the range of Yemeni missiles. The outside red belt, that is the Yafa drone that I showed you on previous episodes. It has a range of 2,500 kilometers. The next rim, the second thinner purple ring, that is the Palestine 2 ballistic missile, also shown on previous episodes. And if you haven't seen those episodes, you can find that on our YouTube channel. There's a playlist of the Resistance Report, and you can find all of these in order of date. So if you want to go back and check those out, but you can see the rings of ballistic missile and drone capacity based out of Yemen, and the multiple rings go ballistic. They go drone, ballistic missile, drone, ballistic missile in that order. If we look at the next one, we have ballistic missile strikes from Yemen on fired towards Tel Aviv and an airbase south of Tel Aviv in the Ashdod area. This is from Sunday. And we can see on this next slide a drone attack. This is civilian footage in Jordan on Friday of a Yafa drone that was downed by the Israelis. Said they downed it over Jordan. The Yemenis said that they launched it. This is near Amman, Jordan. So the Jaffa drone, it can be in flight for 14 hours, 2,500 kilometers, and carries a 50-kilogram warhead. So that might be what we're seeing burning there. Then the Israeli military said that Ansar Allah has fired 220 ballistic missiles and 170 drones in the first phase of this battle before the ceasefire. And since the ceasefire, we know that there's been dozens of both reported. The Yemenis said the Yemeni armed forces targeted 2 Israeli military targets in the Tel Aviv area with the Jaffa drone. The Yemeni armed forces assure the Palestinian people that we are committed to supporting them and will not stop or retreat, and that the confrontation ongoing with the American military aggression against our country will not prevent the Yemeni armed forces from continuing to perform our moral duty toward the people of Palestine until the aggression against them stops and the siege is lifted. And this next slide, you can see how consistent these attacks on Israel have been, both by the Palestinians, by Hezbollah, and by the Yemenis. This is from the Israeli Institute for National Security Studies, which is their essentially their intelligence cutout, their arm's length military and security think tank that keeps these totals. So 34,444 times there has been Israelis running to bomb shelters in 1,348 towns is where the sirens have sounded. For people who can't see the graph that we're showing you, it just displays them from October 2023 right through to this week. If we look to the next slide, we can see the USS Truman again spotted on satellite imagery. This is a Sentinel-2 satellite, and it's via MT Anderson, who's a tracker. And you can see the Harry S. Truman. You can see its Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, guided missile destroyers, and also a cruiser there, the USS Gettysburg. The USS Gettysburg is the one that shot down an F-18 Super Hornet that took off from the USS Truman. So the Truman is carrying somewhere between 60 and 80 fighter jets. And we look at the next slide, you can see the USS Vinson has now arrived. You can see where it is there, just off the coast of Oman. This is from the Copernicus satellite, and it's via Tom Bike on Twitter, who does good open source and AIS tracking of these ships. These are both just recently spotted. So now there's double the aircraft carriers, which doubles the number of planes. There's, roughly 160 to 180 fighter jets now deployed to fight the Yemenis. There's also, as I reported previously, an additional air wing moved to Jordan, and there's B-2 bombers in Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean that have been carrying out bombing raids. B-2 bombers are the largest bombers the U.S. have. They're 10 times the size, can carry 10 times the ordnance of the F-18s that are bombing, and they can also carry heavier bunker busters, which will be used. Likely be used against the underground missile production factories that the Yemenis have. And we're going to look this week, after showing you the ballistic missiles and anti-ship missiles, we're going to show you the anti-ship cruise missiles here. So this next one these are the principal two that the Yemenis use. This is the Mandab anti-ship cruise missile. And this is an 800 plus kilometer range. So this is the one that's being fired at the Americans when they're set back from the Yemeni coast. And also these are shown from a parade in early 2023. All of these weapons have undergone developments and are constantly being upgraded for their distance. And they're also constantly being manufactured. That's the principal one. If we look at the next one, you can see this is the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 anti-ship cruise missile. It's very similar to the PAVA 𝐓𝐡𝐞 land attack cruise missile. It's a anti-ship cruise missile adaptation. If we look at the next one, you can see the PAVA. This is the PAVA. I showed you this during the Operation True Promise. This is the land attack cruise missile that the Iranians fired at the Israelis during Operation True Promise #1. And also consistent this week, if we look at the next slide, you can see another Reaper drone was downed, the 4th Reaper downed since March 15th, the 5th since March 2nd, when Israel blockaded Gaza, and the Yemeni armed forces announced the blockade of the Red Sea. This brings the tally to 19 since the battle in the Red Sea began in solidarity with Gaza, and 23 since 2017, when the Americans were bombing the Yemenis with the Saudis. And Abu Ubaidah released a message to the Yemenis this week. He said, "The loyal brothers in Yemen persist in paralyzing the heart of the Zionist entity, standing firmly by Gaza as it faces a brutal war of extermination, despite paying a heavy price in their precious blood and resources of their dear nation as a result of this unwavering loyalty to Palestine and Al-Aqsa. Palestine and its people will never forget this honorable stance by the Yemenis." So that is the resistance report for day 559. Gaza and Yemen still going strong despite the joint American-Israeli efforts to suppress their resistance.
Thank you so much, John. I don't even know where to start in terms of the just ongoing confiscation of more and more land around the so-called buffer zone or no-go zone in Gaza, the further concentration of Palestinians, what you described and what I've heard Palestinian reporters describe as kill zones inside Gaza, the development of the Morag corridor.
The shoot to kill zones. The thing about the buffer zone is there's not like a line of tape or a stoplight or some kind of way to indicate where the buffer zone ends.
Right.
The only way people know where the buffer zone ends is when they're shot and killed. And we know that, and we've seen that because we saw it with the paramedics in Eastern Rafah, that horrific footage of the Palestinian Red Crescent's paramedics and civil defense firemen recording their own death. They barely stepped outside of their vehicle and they were showered with gunfire from a distance. We know that from the killing of civilians. Nobody knows where the buffer zone is, and that's always been the case. When I worked in Gaza, I walked to school with kids in Rafah because nobody knew where the buffer zone in Rafah was, and the Israelis would shoot at them from the sniper towers, and nobody knows where the line is until they're killed. And the Israelis were in the press this week, Israeli soldiers talking to Haaretz about how they're back to square one in these buffer zones, and that their orders are shoot to kill. And there's no nuance in their orders about women, children, about people coming close to a certain distance. The first sign of sight. One of the soldiers, a tank commander, said, "We're trying to give them the message to not leave their houses." So they step out in the street and they're shot. It's a particularly
and then their houses are bombed from above in an airstrike,
and then they're inside their house when they're bombed by 1,200 airstrikes. So they're talking more than 50 airstrikes a day, which is an operational tempo that was consistent with some of the fiercest fighting of the ground battle. So they're just carrying out these brutal massacres, and no limits. There's just no limits to it.
There never has been, right? And Israel gets to, still, just like the bombing of the Baptist hospital in October 2023 was really a test to see how far Israel could take things. And when nobody spoke up, when no, punishments, no responsibility or accountability or pressure against Israel for any of that, they continued to bomb every single hospital multiple times since then.
Yeah, and they say it. They say these. I read all their field reports, and they said it when they bombed it this week. They said that they bombed the hospital. They said it was a terrorist command center.
Right.
They did the same thing when they put the missile through the second floor of the Nasser hospital a couple weeks back to kill a Palestinian civil servant who survived their first massacre.
Who was being treated in the
Who was being
hospital
treated.
ward. Yeah. Well, I suppose we should. We have a couple things to discuss, but let's talk about any prospects, any news, updates on a so-called ceasefire. You know, we have people like Israel Katz, the Minister of War, Minister of Defense, really boasting about being able to seal the crossings for 7 weeks now. Saying, bragging about how it is a collective punishment in order to, quote unquote, pressure Hamas to fully surrender without any anything from Israel. And I was thinking this week it's so, people are saying, well, Hamas should just take the deal. They should just surrender. They should disarm, as the Israeli military says. Then there won't be any more airstrikes. And of course, that's not how Israel or the West operates. We remember what happened in the 1980s in Lebanon when Israel pressured the PLO to disarm. And we all know what happened right after that, right? The Sabra and Shatila massacre. And they took the deal, right? They took the deal.
They took this deal too.
Yeah.
They're not the ones who abandoned this agreement. They took the deal. And we're going to come back.
The deal.
Yes.
They fulfilled their deal. They met all the stipulations that were agreed upon. And it's Israel and the United States that reneged on it.
That's right.
And we're going to come to Lebanon, which is also relevant in this context, but we're going to come back to that. So,
yeah. Well, let's talk about Ali. Why don't you walk us through the latest prospects for a ceasefire?
Well, I mean, until it happens, it's all just reports and speculation, because practically every week there's reports that it's close. There's another proposal. The mediators have passed on another proposal, and there've been similar reports from that, today. Two Hamas officials told the French news agency that that Hamas's internal discussions on an Israeli truce proposal were nearly complete, and that they plan to respond soon. And that proposal came to Hamas via Egyptian and Qatari mediators earlier this week. But there seems to be little reason to have hope, because the positions seem to be so wide apart. Israel is insisting that it won't withdraw from Gaza, and as John showed us, it's expanding the buffer zones. And Hamas says that's unacceptable. And there have been these demands communicated to Hamas, and even communicated via Egypt, which apparently shocked the Hamas negotiators, calling for disarmament. And that's obviously a red line too. So there isn't much prospect at this point, but you never know. Sometimes we get surprised.
John, what can you say about ceasefire?
I agree. There's not going to be a deal with Qassam and Hamas that involves disarming. And I don't see a deal that doesn't guarantee the end of the war. And it's very difficult to see, sitting here today, how the United States can guarantee that after what they're demonstrating right now. And the escalation in Yemen, which is Yemen is involved in this strictly in solidarity and enforcing its legal obligations, as 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐄𝐿 so rightly pointed out on our show. That in that attack, they're talking about ground war in Yemen in order to overthrow the people who are fulfilling their legal and moral duty. So it's difficult to see because the statement, the positions of Hamas have not changed through this entire thing. They want an end to the aggression. They want a withdrawal from Gaza, a total withdrawal of Israeli forces, and they want an end to the blockade, and they want a prisoner exchange.
Yeah.
And the prisoner exchange has to be negotiated, and we understand the terms and the guidelines for that exchange, and that needs to be worked out. All of these deals that they're being sent are all partial deals. They all say, "Oh, you'll hand back 9 living captives," and as a goodwill gesture, this Eden Alexander, this guy from New Jersey who fights in the Israeli army, Trump making a big deal about him, that you'll give him back for nothing. That'll be just showing good faith. But it's Qassam that has shown good faith through these entire negotiations, living up to every end of the bargain that they signed and agreed upon. And it's Egypt and it's the United States and it's Israel who keep bringing these proposals. And they're the ones who have allowed or actively violated, and not just violated, as I said, reneged. They are owed tents. They are owed humanitarian assistance from a deal already agreed upon that was reneged upon. So it's difficult to see how these guarantors are going to change this dynamic. And I don't know that Trump's like flip-flopping on every single issue 3 times in a day is going to move that closer. So I think that I don't see a breakthrough. But that's deals. That's how deals happen. They don't look like they're going to happen until the minute they happen, and then when they happen, you get the explanation for why it happened. But I'm not.
Yeah, I mean the Netanyahu. Excuse me, it's hard to tell them apart. The Biden administration tried to do, a deal, a non ceasefire for 14 months, where they have a temporary ceasefire or a ceasefire without the Israelis ceasing fire. They tried to do that for 14 months, and Donald Trump is not going to be any more successful in doing essentially a fake ceasefire.
Tried to do it though. They said they were working on it tirelessly without any.
Well, they wanted Hamas to ceasefire. And for the Israelis to be able to carry on to have free fire in the Gaza Strip. They wanted that, and now Trump seems to want that at the moment.
I do think
they're not going to be any more successful.
Yeah.
I do think there's pressure on Hamas to come up with some sort of interim situation that breaks this brutal blockade, because it is a catastrophic situation and it cannot go on indefinitely. The way the lack of food, medicine, and fuel in Gaza. This is the longest by far of this entire war of siege. So we're witnessing something that we've never seen before, and it cannot continue.
And it cannot continue, but of course it's Israel that has imposed that with full international complicity. But as Nora told us in the news report, and as we see every hour, all the alarm bells are ringing. I mean, even from the so-called international community, governments and agencies that have been relatively muted, speaking in language that we haven't seen in 18 months. And there's also a revival of what we spoke about a few weeks ago, the astroturfing of anti-Hamas protests. I think people in Gaza understand. I mean, of course, people have their opinions and they're free to have their opinions. I don't dispute that. There are likely people in Gaza who oppose Hamas. But the idea that going out into the streets to protest Hamas is somehow going to change the situation in Gaza is very strange to me, because, again, Hamas has agreed to a ceasefire, implemented it, has tried to respond positively to all these proposals, but The goalposts keep changing from the United States. We remember just a few weeks ago, Adam Boehler, the US mediator, went to Doha and met with Hamas and then came back and said they're guys just like us, suggesting a deal could be made. Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, made a deal with them. So I think people know that. It's not hard to know, but there is this effort to blame them so that the genocide can be blamed on the victims, in a sense, on the Palestinian people, either by saying you're all Hamas or you didn't do enough to remove Hamas, so we had to kill you all. And it's just absolutely horrible, and it has to break.
Yeah.
And just to say, Hamas has accepted the technocratic government. It was their idea. It goes back many years that Yahya Sinwar was trying reconciliation with Fatah. He thought it was a very important part of the national liberation struggle, and the community support project for technocrats to run the government has been implemented by Hamas. They didn't replace the assassinated Politburo and ministry officials. They are moving towards that process of allowing the governance of Gaza to be out of the hands of Hamas, because that was seen as an obstacle to moving forward in this process. And just like each other part of the negotiation, Hamas, Qassam, has acted in good faith on each of these elements. And so the technocratic government is in place when Egypt says that Hamas can't be the government. They know that the technocratic government is in place. So they're just speaking to an American and Israeli audience when they say things like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good to remember. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens in the coming week. Let's move right along to focusing a little bit on Iran and the Trump administration. Ali, what can you?
Well, last week, regular viewers will recall, we did some analysis of that Netanyahu-Trump meeting at the White House on April 7th and what it all added up to. And we put forward the idea, we perhaps weren't the only ones, but we did put forward the idea that this meant that Trump was not going to back, at least for now, an Israeli attack on Iran or take part as a U.S. attack. For reasons we described last week, people could go back and watch that. But now we have this report in the New York Times that came out late last night and is being widely discussed. And I think we could see the headline. It says, Trump waved off Israeli strike after divisions emerged in his administration. And the long and the short of it is that the Israelis had been pushing very hard for an attack on Iran, which basically could not happen without massive U.S. participation. This article is an admission that Israel by itself is incapable of mounting a significant attack on Iran, let alone one that would cause significant or permanent damage to its nuclear facilities. And so they were lobbying hard for the United States and the Trump administration to participate. But basically, it says that Trump said no. It says Trump made his decision after months of internal debate over whether to pursue diplomacy or support Israel in seeking to set back Iran's ability to build a bomb at a time when Iran has been weakened militarily and economically. There's a lot of spin in this. They claim that Iran's missiles are duds and they couldn't get through Israel's air defenses, which, is not the case from what we saw on October 1st, which was not a full-scale Iranian attack on Israel. And then they talk about supposed fault lines which, by the way, are sort of similar fault lines we saw over the ongoing attacks on Yemen and on Ukraine, where supposedly there are fault lines between a more neocon wing of the administration and what some are calling an America First wing, which includes J.D. Vance, the vice president, and Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence. I mean, they make it sound neater than it is. This administration is very chaotic with, everyone freelancing and speaking as they want to. But the New York Times does say that some American officials were at least initially more open to considering the Israeli plans. General Michael E. Kurilla, the head of U.S. Central Command, and Michael Waltz, the national security advisor, both discussed how the United States could potentially support an Israeli attack if Mr. Trump backed the plan, according to officials briefed on the discussions. And that's interesting because, like with many New York Times or Washington Post stories, this all comes in leaks from top government officials. So also we have to read this article as something the administration wants the world to know. It could be a bluff. Maybe they want Iran to feel a false sense of security that, oh, look, we put Israel in check. But also they may want to send a message in the other direction and say, look, we are not willing to just go along with what Israel wants. And then they say that during a visit earlier this month, General Kurilla told officials there, Israeli officials, that the White House wanted to put the plan to attack the nuclear facility on hold. Mr. Netanyahu called Mr. Trump on April 3rd. According to Israeli officials, Mr. Trump told Mr. Netanyahu that he did not want to discuss Iran plans on the phone, but he invited Mr. Netanyahu to come to the White House. Mr. Netanyahu arrived in Washington on April 7th. While the trip was presented as an opportunity for him to argue against Mr. Trump's tariffs, the most important discussion for the Israelis was their planned strike on Iran. In private discussions, Mr. Trump made clear to Mr. Netanyahu that he would not provide American support for an Israeli attack in May while the negotiations were playing out, according to officials briefed on the discussions. The next day, Mr. Trump suggested that an Israeli military strike against Iran remained an option. If it requires military, we're going to have military, Mr. Trump said. And then let's take a look at that clip. It's actually a bit of a longer clip. We could have cut it, but I just think it's interesting to listen to Trump's stream of consciousness here. So we'll actually listen to the whole thing. It's about 2 minutes long, so brace yourselves.
Ali.
Well, maybe I'll call for it to be cut at some point. But let's just roll with it.
Okay.
Specifically,
Well, they can't have a nuclear weapon.
did you mean military action, though, if they don't agree?
Oh, if necessary? Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you have a
deadline for these
Yeah,
talks?
I do.
And
You're talking about with Iran?
Yes.
Yeah, I
they're saying
do.
it's not
Do you want something
deductible.
definitive this weekend, or do you see this as the start of a process?
It's a start.
Do you have a timeline?
We have a little time, but we don't have much time
Who is it starting? the
because we're not going to let them have a nuclear weapon.
Is
Can't
it
let them have a
awkward to
nuclear
be there, Mr. President?
And we're going to let them thrive. I want them to thrive. I want Iran to be great. The only thing they can't have is a nuclear weapon. They understand that. You know, the people are so incredible in Iran, and they're so smart. They're very smart people. But, you know, they're in a rough situation, rough regime. But they understand, and the leaders understand. And I'm not asking for much. They can't have a nuclear weapon, and I've said that. And I was a little bit surprised because when the election was rigged, I figured they'd get the weapon because with me they were broke. They were broke. They had no money because of the sanctions. Nobody could buy oil. We did that to Venezuela just recently, and we'll do it to other countries if we have to. I want to see Russia and Ukraine make a deal. They got to make a deal. When schools get blown up and bad things happen, like I'm hearing about, it's no good. I hope we're going to make a deal with Russia and Ukraine. But with Iran, if it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. He'll be the leader of that. but nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
When would the clock run out on the talks? Before
Say-
you might, when would the talks need to conclude before you might do military?
I can't really be specific, but you know, when you start talks, you know if they're going along well or not. And I would say the conclusion would be when I think they're not going along well. So that's just a feeling.
Mr. President, on the subject of U.S. troops stationed in Europe, do you have any plans to reduce the number
We can.
of
I think
US
we can.
troops,
We can
in
stop
Europe
it
or
there.
other nations?
Now, there's a couple of interesting things here. I'm sure people will notice other things, but two things stand out for me. One is he says the only thing they can't have is a nuclear weapon, and that's very interesting because that's if he actually means that, and if he sticks to it, which of course we know with Trump, you can't.
Anything's possible.
Anything's possible, but that's significant wording. He says the only thing they can't have is a nuclear weapon. He doesn't say they can't have a nuclear program. Remember when Netanyahu went to Washington, he sat there and he talked about, we want a Libya solution, which to him means going in, dismantling all the reactors, completely taking apart Iran's nuclear program, and then maybe overthrowing the regime, which is what happened in Libya. Trump didn't say that. And so the original nuclear deal, the JCPOA signed by the Obama administration in 2015 said basically was the only thing Iran can't have is a nuclear weapon. It can have a nuclear energy program and research and so on. So let's see where that goes. That's interesting. He didn't put an impossibly high ceiling. At the same time, he did talk about potential military action, which I will not be surprised if it happens. But from what we know, it doesn't look like the US is eager to follow Israel's lead into into a war with Iran. And then that language, he said, Israel will lead it, but then he sort of remembered that doesn't sound good. And he said, nobody leads us. So that caught my attention too.
Yeah, and he didn't. He also is interesting that he doesn't say that the usual sort of language of Iran has to stop supporting terrorism, so-called terrorism. He's not, not bringing in that maximalist position. But
I'm sure
I mean,
the New York Times did for him.
Yeah, as always, you can see why the liberals hate Trump, because he just lays plain the American imperialism. He just sort of says it. The countries have to do this. The country have to do that, and he dispenses with all the pleasantries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else we want to add about Iran, or I know we want to get to Lebanon as well.
The one thing I'll say is that the Iranian foreign minister, Mr. Arakchi, did make a comment that it's very hard to, Iran is there, they're negotiating, but it's really hard when the US position seems to shift every 5 minutes. And I think Russia is in a similar circumstance when they're trying to negotiate. Like, depends on the time of day and who's speaking.
Yeah.
You really don't have any. You're trying to guess what the U.S. position is, and that makes negotiations very hard. And that's not because the Americans are deliberately keeping people guessing as a strategy. There is genuine chaos in this administration when it comes to coordinating positions among different actors.
Yeah. All right. Well, what can we say about Lebanon in all of this? Israel is continuing to seize land, raise villages in the south. And this week, Netanyahu declared that Israel will be, occupying the south of Lebanon indefinitely. What's going on here?
Well, what I want to talk about is this story in the Washington Post that appears today. And again, I think we can pull up and show the headline, which is Lebanese army making progress in displacing Hezbollah near Israeli border. And this is a really quite a sophisticated piece of propaganda, and that's what it is. And it needs some deciphering. So it begins, the Lebanese army has increased its deployment in the country's south over the past few months, confiscating Hezbollah's arms and dismantling its positions under the terms of a US-brokered ceasefire agreement between the militant group and Israel, according to interviews with Lebanon's prime minister, Lebanese military officials, and diplomats. So their spin here is that the ceasefire agreement, the way this is phrased, it makes you think that the ceasefire agreement calls for the disarming of Hezbollah, which is not actually the case. And then they say, you know, troops have been sent down. And then, quote, the army is making serious progress. It's expanding and consolidating its presence in the south, Lebanon's new Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said in an interview with the Washington Post. And then they say such an effort was unimaginable only a year ago when Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's leader, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike in September, was touting new weapons and vowing to maintain the group's positions. So they're spinning this as the result of Hezbollah somehow being destroyed or degraded or even militarily defeated. And then they say, and this is really interesting, and I think it reveals something they didn't necessarily intend. They say the ceasefire agreement calls for the gradual deployment of 10,000 Lebanese soldiers who will be responsible for confiscating Hezbollah arms and dismantling the Islamist group's positions in the south. Again, the implication that disarmament is part of the agreement, which it isn't. And then they say, a 5-member committee headed by the US is overseeing. A diplomat with knowledge of the matter, who, like the others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive subject, of course, said the committee receives coordinates of arms depots and missile launchers from the Israelis or UN peacekeepers, and then the Lebanese military is to take action. So what they're describing here is all of this is framed as restoring Lebanese sovereignty, but what they're describing here is a process where the Lebanese army acts just like the Palestinian Authority, as subcontractors for Israel. And there's, and then they say, I'm skipping a bit, and they say, they talk about, in recent weeks, calls have mounted for the Lebanese military to disarm Hezbollah across the country. They don't say who those calls have come from, but what is that? That's a call for a Lebanese civil war. And those calls are not coming from within Lebanon. So they say calls have mounted, they don't tell you who. And then they say Prime Minister Salam, meanwhile, said his country is working to ensure the state's right to monopolize the bearing of arms, quote, north and south of the Litani. Then they point out, as you said, Nora, that Israel hasn't withdrawn from South Lebanon as it was required to do in the same ceasefire agreement that they're lauding, and has said it won't. And then they say that this could undermine confidence in the ceasefire. Now, what is this? And I'm indebted here to the Lebanese analyst Nasser Qandil, who I listen to regularly, and who points out that the bet that the leaders of the Lebanese state, the new US-endorsed leaders, the President Joseph Aoun and the Prime Minister Nawaf Salam made, is that if they behave like good boys, and that's what this article is designed to show, look how good we've been. We've been as good as Mahmoud Abbas, even more obedient than Mahmoud Abbas. Then the Americans will help us, and they'll pressure Israel to withdraw from South Lebanon and stop bombing Lebanon and stop making us look completely powerless and like stooges. In other words, It's the bet
We want to
here
be
is
stooges, but we don't want to look like stooges.
we want to be stooges, and we are stooges because
Yeah.
look what a good job we're doing.
Yeah.
And now America, please come in. And then there's this little anecdote they put in. They say the army, like most of Lebanon, is reeling from the country's economic crisis. And then they talk about how troops often moonlight to make ends meet. One soldier, Mohammed, 36, says he works 3 days a week at a supermarket, bagging groceries and shelving goods to support his family. And so then there's a pitch for U.S. financing and military aid. And then here there's a quote that really, I think, gives the game away. Edward Gabriel, a former U.S. diplomat who heads the non-governmental American Task Force on Lebanon, said in an interview that the Lebanese military would need more training and resources to disarm Hezbollah and urged the United States to lend support. So who is this? This is the American Task Force for Lebanon, is a very right-wing pro-Israel group made up of very right-wing elements in the United States, of sort of the Lebanese diaspora in the United States. And they've existed for a long time. They used to actually be a collaborationist Palestinian group modeled on them called the American Task Force for Palestine, which went bust and has been defunct for a few years. But the American Task Force for Lebanon is still going strong. And to give you a sense of what their politics are, I'm going to show you this. Let's skip down, Tamara, to the op-ed in the fairobserver.com. And this is an op-ed by a guy called Stephen Howard. And it's called Why Lebanon is Valuable to an America First Foreign Policy. This was published just earlier this month. And I'll just read one sentence in this op-ed. It's the only sentence you need to hear. Quote, in Lebanon, the U.S. needs a partner I'll start again. In Lebanon, the U.S. needs a partner to counter Iran and protect Israel. Lebanon also serves as the only model of a pluralistic democracy in the region. So who is this Stephen Howard? Tamara, let's skip back to the previous link. There you go. This is the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA cutout, the U.S. regime change arm, where Stephen Howard is a fellow. And he is also the Director of Policy and Outreach for the American Task Force on Lebanon. So I just thought it was worth showing how this whole Washington Post article is basically the American Task Force on Lebanon is an extension of the Israel lobby. And this whole article is really a pitch from this Lebanese wing of the Israel lobby for the United States to arm and finance a Lebanese proxy war or civil war to rid Lebanon of its resistance. And this is pitched as somehow a success. So I just wanted to give kind of a lesson in reading Washington Post propaganda.
Thank you. That's always really helpful. Very, very important. Yeah, John, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Lebanon and Hezbollah and where the resistance is right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a difficult situation for them. Those 5 Israeli positions in the south that are attempting to be held inside Lebanese territory, they're away from population centers, but they're clearly over the line, or over the blue line. They're clearly in Lebanese territory. Yeah, it's a difficult situation. I think that there's Lebanon is a weak country, at nation state at this point, and I don't think that there's a lot of capacity to carry out a protracted war. So I think they're in a bit of a bind right now that it's not easy to see the way out of.
But look at the parallels here. Israel having failed to defeat and destroy Hamas in Gaza, despite the horrific levels of death and destruction and killing, is now increasingly turning to a strategy of trying to turn Palestinians against each other and to foment intra-Palestinian strife and civil war. And exactly the same in Lebanon, having failed, the spin that Hezbollah was defeated by Israel, the lie is given to that by the fact that, yes, Israel is in these 5 points near the border, and they do bomb Lebanon periodically. But Israel was unable to occupy significant parts of Lebanese territory, and they were really unable to enter Lebanon significantly, let alone stay there. And so, again, the strategy now is reverting to what we couldn't achieve. Let's try to get the Lebanese to do to themselves by fomenting civil war within Lebanon. So what I think many Lebanese hope would be an opportunity for reinforcing or building national unity in Lebanon by the resistance by Hezbollah agreeing to step back and to let the state take the lead. What we're seeing is nothing works. Like, there's no concession you can make that gets these Israel and the United States off your back. They're like, okay, Hezbollah stepped back. They agreed to the ceasefire. They agreed to move their forces north of the Litani. Again, nothing in the agreement about disarmament, contrary to what this Washington Post article is trying to suggest. And yet here they are, lobbying for Washington to finance a civil war to destroy Lebanon on behalf of Israel, just as they did in Syria.
I think that, look, I mean, there's no doubt that, as we've covered, like, there's no doubt that Hezbollah did receive blows.
And they don't deny that.
Yeah. Hassan Nasrallah was killed, the pager operations and so forth. There's no doubt they received blows, but the idea that the Lebanese military is even capable of disarming them is there's a fantasy.
Or that the Lebanese people want them to be disarmed. That's also...
Yeah, but you don't actually have to achieve disarmament, because if you get a Lebanese civil war, which is what these people want, that's, that's great. They love failed states, failed divided states like Syria, like what happened in Iraq after the U.S. invasion. That's a good outcome as their concern.
The Libya model, truly. Yeah. All right. Well, so much more to keep in our back pocket in the coming weeks. Thanks, Ali, for that media literacy course. And let's see. Let's take a look at the website. We have published so much this week, including features by our writers in Gaza and reports by our staff. That up there at the very top is breastfeeding under Israeli bombs, an interview I did with a nurse lactation consultant who's working inside Gaza right now and just has some of the most harrowing stories I think I've ever heard in the last 18 months. And I was just so honored to host her. And so glad that we got to make that work. And just, since we recorded that, she's been texting me with even more harrowing reports from the patients that she's caring for and working with her local colleagues. Just, these stories that don't get illuminated in the day-to-day, retelling and reporting on these massacres day after day, the unmitigated terror that, that the most vulnerable, the children, new mothers are enduring, and their families, it's just absolutely unbearable. So please go and check that out. I also interviewed Tarek Lubani, good friend of the show, who's a Canadian physician, who's talking about kind of the overall medical crisis and catastrophe in Gaza. We also have just some incredible features. I read from Donya Ahmed Abu Sitta's feature, A Day in Ward B, earlier on in the show. Really just gorgeous writing. And other features. And Ali, what struck you this week reading our submissions?
What strikes me always is I don't know how to find the right word. Strength and resilience sound like, nobody in Gaza has chosen to be in this situation. People are finding strength because they have to. They're finding ways to survive because they have to, and mostly because they have people to live for and look after. And that's what comes out in so many of these stories. And the fact that they're still telling them, and the fear that's always expressed. I see this theme time and again in so many of the features we publish from writers in Gaza, is the fear of being forgotten. And I think that's where our responsibility really kicks in, to make sure that we don't allow Gaza to be forgotten, to be sidelined, to be moved to the back pages. And we talked earlier in this program about the crackdown on free speech, and that can be very demoralizing because their goal is to scare us. And they may come after some of us, but they can't come after all of us. And so we have to keep speaking out. And we have to remember, as we discussed last week, we are the majority. At this point, 53% of Americans are expressing negative views of Israel, according to that Pew Research poll we published last week. That's an extraordinary historic shift, despite the wall-to-wall propaganda we're all subjected to, the media complicity in this. Somehow people are still seeing the truth and understanding it. And I want people to hold on to that and remember that their efforts, whether it's a few people going out into the street and handing out flyers, or just being visible with a sign in solidarity with Gaza, all of these gestures, all of these things have meaning, and they show other people that I'm not alone, that there's lots of other people that think the way I do. So keep speaking out in every corner of the United States and in all the other countries where people are watching and listening to us. That's the message I take from this.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful, Nora, that I'm so glad that you did this interview with the lactation consultant, and that you've been able to carry on doing this work with all these interviews with healthcare workers, because it's so important to remember that this is part of the genocide too. The systematic destruction and denial of healthcare and of reproductive care. Israel is trying to wipe out the next generation, is what they're trying to do, and so this is part of the death tolls, part of the Gaza Holocaust too.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that. I mean, I've always been so interested in healthcare and in a journalistic way, because it is really the barometer of the health of a community. The center of a community is the hospital in many places around Palestine, and by Israel trying to decimate every single aspect of medical care and healthcare and the practice itself of caring. I think it's really important to keep these healthcare workers, front and center, and so it's my honor and my privilege to keep doing that. Thank you. And of course, if you haven't already and you're able to, we appreciate the donations. You can click on the Donate Now link up at the top of our website. There we go. And especially our monthly donors. We have an incredible and growing amount of monthly donors. You can sign up so that it is automatically deducted every month, and you know that you are continuing to support this publication and this live stream and our writers in Gaza. It is a lifeline. So I just want to give a special shout out to our monthly sustainers and donors. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just say we're so grateful to each and every one of you. I'm going to say a few names, just first names. There's Peter, Mary, Leon, Xavier, Abdurrahman, all recent donors, some of them monthly donors, and there are many more that I can't name everyone, but I just want to say to each and every one of you, we are super grateful because you allow us to keep doing this work through thick and through thin, through the bad days, through the better days, and hopefully much better days to come. Thank you for being with us all the way. And thank you, as ever, for all your incredible messages of love and solidarity and support for each of us and for many of our writers in Gaza. We get them, we read them, we can't always reply to all of them, but this is the reply to say thank you and we really love you.
Well said. Thank you. And I also want to thank, of course, Tamara Nassar for directing and producing this live stream and all the standalone podcasts and everything else that she does day in and day out. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you to Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, Michael F. Brown, our fact checker, Ellie Gerzon for social media, and Pierre Loisel for the compiling of these into really beautiful radio packages. To everyone at the Electronic Intifada, our editors, and every one of us, on behalf of myself, Ali, John, Asa, and Tamara, thank you all, and we will see you next week.